Hey everybody, Tom Barnes, stories from the 78. Going out to Manhattan, and that's where I talked to my friend Irene. How are you?
I'm great. Nice to be on your show, Tom.
Absolute joy to have you on. You have done a lot in your life. You were author, reporter at one time that I read, an editor. You have written a few books, and you've advocated for children to better understand how to teach them to read versus what the schools were telling you how they were going to teach their kids to read, right?
Yes. Yes.
So talk about that a little bit. You wrote this book called I Didn't Believe Him, which is a very personal story about your son and the journey of not I remember I was reading where you were like cooking dinner and your son came up to you and said, "They're not teaching me how to read." And that's kind of and this is like right in the middle of all these things that were going on in your life where you really regretted the fact in that moment that you didn't listen to him, but then through a journey, you did listen and find out things to then go on to become a developmental psychologist specializing in teaching children how to read.
Yes. So I didn't believe him. I didn't believe him. The subtitle for the book is, like you said, my son told me his school wasn't teaching him how to read. I told him to trust his
Mm-hmm.
teacher, and this is the story of what happened next. But it's very important to say that this is not just his story. I wrote this book um, to show what it's like, what has been like for literally millions of other children whose schools have failed to teach them how to read, because this has been going on for almost 100 years. It's not a new anything new. There have been different methods of what the type of teaching that I'm going to talk about, but um, so the book, just talk about the book a little bit, and then I'll tell you what happened in his school. So the book uses his story as a window to what's
Sure.
happened to lots of other kids. It takes you behind the scenes of his school, so you can actually see and understand. Because sometimes we read in the newspaper, schools are failing to teach kids to read. They're not teaching enough phonics. Three sentences. Okay, move on. But this like really shows you
Yeah, exactly.
what happened in the classroom. It takes you behind the scenes of my family's life. It shows how my family was impacted by what the school was doing. Because when kids don't learn anything in school, but particularly reading, they're ashamed, they're embarrassed. I actually read this morning that they experience the same level of stress that combat soldiers do, the same level of PTSD. That's how traumatic it
Mm.
is for these kids. Um, and so it shows, the impact on him, impact on me, on my marriage, on my older son. There's a whole trickle down effect that happens. And it talks about the history of reading instruction. And I think in the end gets across the most important message, which, much to my surprise, teachers all across the country are agreeing with. I was a little bit nervous about saying this, and I've been doing, a bunch of interviews and podcasts with teachers or former teachers, and the response I've gotten has been overwhelmingly, unanimously in favor of what I'm about to say, which is no parent should
Okay.
ever blindly trust their child's school. Um, so they should trust if that trust is earned, but not blindly. So ask questions.
Just like you would if
Parents.
you were looking for the proper doctor or mechanic, if you will, right? Like anything in life, you got to kind of do a little research and advocate for yourself.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah, and that's harder said than done, I think, for a lot of parents, just because they're dealing with schedules and school and work and getting this kid over here, that kid over there. But I mean, I can sympathize on my own end just because my daughter has dyslexia, and it was a struggle in the beginning because they were like, well, she's not doing X, Y, or Z, and I'm like, well, have you tried ABC, and they were like, well, that's not how we do it. It's like, well, but that's not how she learns, and that's kind of become our story with her and my son, actually, who has ADHD. And he learns differently. And we got him on programs where they were able to then learn the way that their brain allows them to learn. And all of a sudden they went from struggling to succeeding. So I imagine the same thing happened with you and your family and your son.
So I'm actually going to circle back and ask you a question about your kids, because you said a few things that are very, very, very important. Um, how was your kids' school teaching reading? Do you know? What were they doing
How's
or
there
not
what?
doing? How was their school teaching reading? What were they doing in the classroom?
Just like the traditional way, learning, with the ABCs, and then trying to, sound out words according to the pictures on the page, things like that. I mean, my kids are older now, so it's been a while, but
Hmm. Hmm.
yeah, that's kind of where we were at. More of the traditional sense that I remember as I was growing up.
So they were teaching them to sound out words, or maybe not.
They were, yes.
They were, okay, because that is how children with dyslexia do need to be taught. They need to be taught to sound out words and what is happening. There were obviously other things happening, and I wasn't there, and you don't remember. Let's move away from their story. But what's happened to a lot of children in our country, there's a phrase: is it dyslexia or dysteachia? Dyslexia by definition is an inherent neurological disorder. Something is up in the brain where people, not just children, aren't able to read well. And dyslexia in our country exploded in the 1920s when schools first moved away from teaching kids how to sound out words and began teaching them to memorize whole words instead. And you can memorize some words and memorize enough so that you can read simple stories given to you. But when you get to third grade, everything falls apart because there are no longer pictures that you can use to help you figure out what an unknown word might be.
Right.
And so it's very important for parents and families, to realize that all kids can learn using phonics. And phonics is teaching kids how to sound out words. Schools all across the country have been using a method called balanced literacy that has kids guess what the words are from the pictures or use context clues or just the first letter of a word. And that's actually how dyslexic kids read, who are not able to sound out words. So they've been teaching kids to read the way struggling dyslexic readers do. And they've been causing, there's a phrase now in the field, the research field, it's called environmental dyslexia. It's caused by the environment. It's caused by the classroom. That should never happen to any child. So I just think it's important for parents to be aware of that.
Yeah, I mean, it's the more you know about what's going on in the classroom with your children, I think the better are your help to equip them to learn. Because even in the best setting, it's still hard to go to school for kids. It's still a learning process. It's still a thing where they might not understand, and it could be taught the perfect way. But kids are kids. People are people. People learn differently, understand things differently, and I imagine that is just some of the things that you've dealt with your family and the journey of what made you write the book I Didn't Believe Him.
Hmm. Hmm. So what made me write this book is I wanted to help prevent what happened to my family from happening to other families in the country. Because if I had, so what happened was, you mentioned this earlier. Eric at age five, we're talking a really tiny little young person, right? Came home from
Yeah.
kindergarten, right? And said, Mommy, my
Hmm.
school isn't teaching me how to read. They tell us to guess what the words are from the pictures, and that's not reading. How do you read? And I told him, trust your school. His school it was and is still a very well-regarded school. I was really impressed that he had been accepted there. It's a public school, but you need to apply for admission. Great test scores, great everything. What I didn't realize was how proactive the other families had been in teaching their kids how to read at home. That's like the elephant in the room that people don't talk about, um, how really proactive many families are, because either they're aware that there's a problem in the schools, or just because it's fun. It actually is really a lot of fun to teach a child how to read if you have the right materials and know how to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And Tom, I don't know if you know this actually, but I've also written a series of workbooks that parents can use to teach their kids how to read at home. Gives them step-by-step instructions, and I have a free video on my website. The website is stepstoreading.com, that parents can look at, and it just tells them, tells you exactly what to do, so they can see how easy and fun it can be, and rewarding. But so he told me those words. I told him to trust his school. Kindergarten year was a nightmare. I don't know if you experienced this with your kids, but when there's a struggle in
Yes.
school, right? They start not liking school. They don't want to go to school.
They doubt themselves. Yeah, it's not good.
Exactly.
It's
Eric started
heartbreaking.
having to watch, right? And I didn't know what was happening. Did you know what was happening? Did you know it was because there was an issue in school?
No, I mean, they just the normal, like, I don't like school. I don't, it's hard, like that. So we kind of knew like he was struggling with like math and reading, and my daughter with reading. She just couldn't keep up in class and she would get really discouraged. So then we realized that we needed to get her tested to see what was going on, if she did have a learning disability of some kind. And that's when I think a teacher might have suggested she might have dyslexia, and then we got her tested, and it was proven that she did. And then once we had that diagnosis, it armed us with the right tools to advocate for her, to get her, I believe it's an IEP at
Mhm.
school, and then she's excelled, and she's an honor roll student now in her freshman year in high school.
That's great. That's a wonderful happy ending. And Eric's story has a happy ending too, but it so almost didn't. Like, it so almost didn't happen. We so
Yeah, I bet.
narrowly avoided a train wreck. So okay, his kindergarten year was a nightmare. I had no idea why. And this is something else that parents need to know. Report cards often don't tell you the whole truth about what's going on in the classroom. Time Magazine did an article on this last year, saying how, parents think their kids are reading at a certain grade level and they're reading way below what the parents, think they are doing. And Eric in kindergarten brought home a phenomenal report card, great grades in reading. He had no idea how to read. And he finally got through to me in first grade, got me to understand what the problem was. And this is what he did. Now imagine the thought that went into this. Okay, now we're talking about a 6-year-old boy in first grade. He comes home and he says, now this is after an entire year had passed, and I told him to trust his school. A school that, by the way, I have no ill will towards, because the teachers were doing what they had been trained to do in college. Everyone meant well, right?
Sure.
But
Yeah.
he came. No teacher wants to not teach a child to read, right? So he came
Right.
home from
Of
school.
course.
He took a book. And said, "Mommy, do you want to see how I read?" And I said, "Sure." He took the book, he held it behind his back. I'm not sure if you can see what I'm doing. And at exactly the right time, so he started, quote unquote, reading. Now the book's behind his back, right? How could he be reading?
Mm-hmm.
He read
Right.
the words, "A house is a home." Turn the page. "A teepee is a home." Turn the page. "An apartment building
So you
is a
just
home."
memorized.
He memorized. Now, this is a little boy who probably didn't know what the word memorize meant, right? He didn't use it. He
Sure.
didn't
Mm-hmm.
say it. He had to show me what he was doing for me to finally understand. And I almost died. I mean, to realize that
Ugh.
my kid had spent a year, right? I had walked in, I had not walked in, his school had an open school week where parents could come and watch the kids in their classroom, how they were being taught. And I saw my usually extroverted, chatty, really happy little boy sitting in the back of the room in silence, just sort of bowing his head in shame. And I was like, what is going on? So to realize that he had to live through that for a year before I took action. That's what made me write I Didn't Believe Him. And this is all sounding very serious, but I have to stress, the book actually is a #1 Amazon bestseller, which is really exciting. And it's gotten
Yeah,
phenomenal.
congratulations.
Thank you. It's gotten phenomenal reviews.
We got it
And
right here.
and I think you'll agree, many of the reviews have said it reads like a suspense novel, like what's going to happen next. It's entertaining. This isn't some heavy-handed treatise on reading and, oh, woe is
Yeah.
us, right? It walks you, you're living the experience with us. You're experiencing what it's like to live in Manhattan. You're experiencing New York City schools. You're experiencing a family. You're experiencing what a child experiences when he doesn't learn to read, and learning about the history of reading instruction in the process. So I did not write it in a serious way. I wanted it to be a book that people would enjoy reading, and at the same time learn something really valuable from.
Yeah, and that's definitely the case. Learning something valuable and making a lot of parents perhaps feel like they're not alone in this process, or figuring out like why is, not why is my kid singled out, but like how do, like it's just more of like how do I help my kid? Like something is, reading should be enjoyable for kids at that age because they're discovering this whole new world. And I think it's even more and more important with, screens becoming such a reality in the school system and in life, for, if they're using a Google Chromebook or their phone, whatever, screens are always there. So reading on paper when they're starting out, I mean, that's just, you see the pictures that you're talking about where their imagination starts flowing. It's I remember it as a kid being like, there's this whole other world that you can't even describe at that age where you're discovering. And that shouldn't be torturous. It should be fun to encourage them to continue to read. And, when parents see the opposite, especially with that, the head down, I mean, that's very much the way my son was before he was diagnosed with ADHD, because he just was like, he felt embarrassed, and he he said things that were scary, where we're like, we need to figure out what's going on with him right now, like, because this isn't good. And at the time the school wasn't doing enough, and we had to advocate for him. And then finally we got to a place where he was diagnosed properly. And, we're hoping this school year will be a better one than last year with the proper diagnosis going forward. But all the things you talk about in your book are things that we experience as a family. And it's really, kids can really be really hard on themselves without you really knowing it, until you just listen to what they say and they drop little hints here and there. And you're like, oh, that's a little, And then you explore those things. And that's kind of how you find things out sometimes as parents, right?
Absolutely. So what were some of the hints that your son said? Do you remember, or like what he said?
He said he just didn't like it. And I said, well, what do you mean you don't like it? He's like, well, I don't get it and I don't remember it. And I said, well, how do you not remember it? Because you were just in school, well, I don't remember. And I'm like, at first we thought he was just being a boy, lazy, but then, at home he's not lazy, and, or when he does other things, he's very, meticulous about things. And we started doing research, and, kids with ADHD have, they forget things a lot. They have kind of messy rooms. They get overwhelmed, and he definitely gets overwhelmed really easily, where you can just see it now. And now we're better at reading him and helping him, get through something where, he doesn't like explode, because he would just get really upset really quickly and didn't want to go to school, and, was pretending he was sick because he didn't want to go. So, that was a long journey last year, even the last 2 years, I would say. But we're finally at a place where, he's seen the right doctor to help him get what he needs as far as treatment. And then, he's, so far school's okay this year, and it's a week into it, but still I'll take the win.
Yeah, that's great. What you said about, he would explode, that's something very important for people to know too. Kids feel safe at home. Kids can express their feelings, or they can let out feelings that in school they've been holding in. And I own a K through 12 tutoring company in Manhattan, so we work with a lot of
Hmm.
families. And I often hear, from parents whose kids are struggling with reading in particular, because reading, affects everything. If you can't read, right, you're affected in your science class, your English class, your history class, your you know,
Yeah.
your
Math
English class,
problems. Woo, like
right?
word problems.
Exactly. And they're struggling to try and keep up, to try to understand it, to try to do it, to try to keep it a secret that they can't do it. And they're working and working and they're working so hard. It is really a rare child who doesn't care. But what starts happening is when kids are struggling this much, they will either in school become a behavior problem, because then the teacher will focus on, oh, Johnny's not behaving, let's get him in line. And no,
Yep.
everyone's paying attention to the behavior and not to the fact that he can't do the schoolwork, right? Or they do what my son did. They move to the back of the classroom.
100%.
But those kids, when they come home, oh my God, the things that sometimes go on. This one mother, her son would be literally destructive to the point that she was scared of her little first grader. He would throw her phone, he would smash glasses. And we finally realized, okay, hold it. This kid does not know how to read. And let's help him learn, and things, slowly settled down. So many things that seem, or like when you say lazy, they're not trying. It is not, it's so often a way of compensating, or, but yeah, it can be hard for kids, and it's, it can also, well, go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, good.
Just, it can be hard for kids, but if parents know what to look for, those signs, like you said, you finally heard what your son was saying. I finally heard what my son was saying. They tell you, even if they say the words, I hate reading, they're telling you something's wrong, right?
Yes,
Because
100%.
no kid who has learned to read well is going to say, I hate reading. Maybe I don't want to read right now, but you're not going to hear, I hate reading.
Right.
So
Yeah.
yeah,
And it breaks your heart too, growing up, remembering kids that I knew growing up who had those problems, but that wasn't a thing back then. It was just, figure it out, or you're gonna have to stay after school, and you're gonna still have to, like, then they would just, the same thing that didn't work over and over again. They had to learn, to get around that themselves, or they had parents that were extremely involved, which it happened back in the 80s and 90s, but not like now. There wasn't as much technology. There was no YouTube. There was no internet for the early part of the 90s and the 80s. You know what I mean? So parents just kind of just believe this school wholeheartedly, like you talked about. And that's one thing that you shouldn't do. Advocate for your kids. And that's why you wrote this story here that is very helpful. So thank you very much. And you have a lot of things going on. You have a business, you've written books, you do a whole thing. What's the best way for people to find you, follow you, and get more information about you?
Sure. Well, my website is stepstoreading.com. There you'll find, information on me, on the books. There's an email for me. On Twitter, I'm at Steps to Reading. So that's a good way. But I would say my website is the primary way. There are a lot of free resources on there, worksheets to download, videos to watch, just a lot of valuable and free information.
Well, thank you for taking time to chat with me. I do appreciate it. And as a parent who has kids who have struggled with school for reasons they can't control, it's a relief to see this starting to become more mainstream, so you don't feel so isolated. Because as a parent, if I feel isolated, I can't imagine how my kids feel. And that's what broke my heart in the beginning. So to really be on this journey with them is very helpful. So thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.